Gov. And then Sarah, if you'd like to call your committee.
I call to order the Eastham School Committee meeting, and we have a quorum.
And then we're going to do select board information, public comment. And does anyone from the board have any information? I was asked by Amy Ekman to let everybody know that Lower Cape Pride is this weekend. And it includes some events starting on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And you can, I think, visit Lower Cape Pride on Instagram if you want to know more about it. And I think that was it. Any public comment or not on the agenda? No. All right. Well, to our business is a presentation and discussion on the Nauset Elementary and Middle Schools Efficiency and Regionalization Study.
All right. Hi, I'm Jerry Searcell. I'm on the steering committee on the select board in Eastham. And good evening. I would thank you for being here tonight on the fourth and last such meeting of the school committee, of the steering committee for the Nauset Elementary and Middle School Efficiency and Regionalization Study. We appreciate the time the community members, educators, town leaders, and families have taken throughout this process to engage in this important conversation about the future of our schools. The study did not encompass the high school. Over the past several years, enrollment has declined meaningfully across the elementary schools, while operating costs and staffing pressures have continued to rise. At the same time, school facilities across the region require significant investment. Individually, each of these challenges is manageable. Taken together, they raise important questions about how the region can best organize its schools, its resources, and support to sustain high-quality education opportunities over the long term. This study was commissioned to look at these issues holistically rather than in isolation. It is important to emphasize that the purpose of tonight's presentation is not to advocate for a single predetermined outcome. Last year, a steering committee comprised of representatives from the school boards, the school committees, and from all four towns, plus the regional school committee, as well as 4 town managers or administrators, and Nauset superintendent was assembled. I'd like to take a minute to recognize the members of the steering committee or the Nauset Regional School Committee town reps that are in attendance. I'm already one of them, Jerry Searcell from Eastham. I think way over the side is Jackie Beebe, our current town manager from Eastham. To my far left over here is Glenn Brandt, who is the superintendent of the Nauset Regional Schools. And in back, if you could just stand up and say your names and what town you represent on the from the school committee, I'd appreciate it. Oh, I forgot, excuse me, Sarah Higgins, the chair of the Eastham School Committee, a very, very valuable person as far as our study commission. So go ahead, just introduce yourselves from the Nauset Regional School Committee.
Sarah Stera, I represent Eastham. Laura Noonan-Carey, also representing Eastham from the Regional School Committee.
Tom Fitzgibbons, Brewster, the Nauset Regional School Committee.
And Harry Hoffman, also representing Brewster on the Nauset Regional School Committee, although not a member of the steering committee, the Regionalization Efficiency Study.
All right, thank you. Now, since last summer, the steering committee has worked alongside with our consultants, HMFH Architects and Civic Solutions Group, to examine the opportunities and challenges facing the region and to explore possible paths forward for the elementary schools and the broader middle school regional system. It has been a daunting but important undertaking for our communities. As you will hear at the end of tonight's presentation, the steering committee looks forward to continuing our work together in the coming months and years. Tonight's presentation is intended to share the findings of that work, explain the process that led to the development of the scenarios, and considerations in the report, and to provide an opportunity for the community to hear directly from the study team. We expect the presentation will take about an hour. The Select Board and School Committee will then be invited to make comments and ask questions before opening it up to the public. There is a lot of complex material to cover, so we would ask that you refrain from questions until after the presentation is complete. There will also be ample opportunities for the town and school officials and residents and taxpayers to share feedback in the weeks and months ahead. I'll turn it over to Lori and Justin from HMF Architects, and Justin and Paula for the Civic Solutions Group to begin the presentation.
Is the little green light on? Sorry.
That it was. Thank you, Jerry. I appreciate it. Again, my name is Lori Coles with HMFH Architects, and with me are Justin and Paula from Civic Solutions Group. We want to start by just going over the big picture. Thank you very much. Of what we have done over the months. As Jerry mentioned, we started in August, and that really was an investigative phase, understanding the existing conditions in all the buildings. We walked all of the schools with our engineers. We met with the principals of all the schools. We met with the facilities or custodial staff of all the schools to really understand the existing buildings and operations as they were. We moved on to an analysis phase of all that information, as well as we're going to talk a lot about tonight, priority development, a very wide-ranging outreach to the communities to develop what is called a priority framework. The priority framework really is a tool to identify your priorities and then be used as a way to rank or understand the different opportunities that we were putting forward. We have since compiled all of this into a full report, and that full report is 3 volumes. Somebody actually gave me the count of the number of pages at one of our meetings, 500 and something pages. We do not expect that everyone here has read every word, but we are going to be high level and certainly able to direct you to the sections that things are further detail if you're looking for it. And we're really ending with the presentations of our findings. As Jerry said, your door number 4. Last but not least, we're very excited to be here today to share all the information with you. Next. I think these guys have the slides for us, except for they're distracted. So we are going to cover all of the scope of work that we have done, and then, as Jerry mentioned, end with next steps and open to questions for everybody. Next. So starting with existing facility analysis. Again, as I said, we went to every building. There's 5 in this grouping. As noted, does not include the high school. They range in age from being constructed in 1938 to as recent as 1996. But they all have aging systems, and they all have code compliant issues. And I say this as trying to understand that it's in relationship to today's codes. The buildings weren't designed wrong. There's nothing wrong with them in that respect. But any work you would do going forward, you would bring it up to today's codes. So our first blush work was to sort of establish that sort of core level of work that's needed in the building. This is not a full renovations numbers. This is not rearranging program space or adding program space or any of the above. It's purely systems and code compliance. And we developed what we're calling the baseline repair costs, which you see on the screen for each building. We have just calculated sort of a cost per square foot. There was a good question which sort of said, why do they range so much, the cost per square foot? And it really is twofold. One, what is the work that needs to be done, and in relationship to the amount of square footage that you have in those buildings. And because, we didn't want anyone to jump on those numbers as being the number in any possible way. You need to understand that any of these numbers are straight construction, and to get to a total project cost, which includes things like soft costs, swing space, some level of escalation, all the other things that sort of make a project, we just simply said, assume doubling that number. This is all without designs. That's not part of the work right now. Any further project of anything we discussed today would need to start with a feasibility study, which we can talk more about what that is. Okay, next. Oh, I'm saying next to you, sorry. Next to you, sorry. We did a number of analysis of efficiency and utilization. So this is when I'm going to first talk about the Massachusetts School Building Authority, MSBA. Many of you are probably familiar with this entity. It is our state's funding mechanism for public schools. And as such, they work with schools throughout the Commonwealth, and they have developed what they refer to as their guidelines. And they have guidelines on a lot of different things, but specifically square footage and space and number of spaces and all of that. So this chart is really just looking at the efficiencies within the classrooms. So not the whole building, that comes next, but just looking at classroom efficiencies. So the top couple rows there in the first row of bold numbers sort of shows a low of 57% to a high of 78% of classroom efficiencies. And this is in relation to how many students are in a room. On average, the elementary school is approximately 15 students per classroom. The middle school is approximately 18 students per classroom. It was asked, and so I want to answer, the middle school at 78% isn't really that far off from a typical utilization. So typical utilization is anywhere from 80 to 85%. You never program a building to 100% because then you have no elbow room for any differentiatings throughout the school day. Next. So looking at this, yeah, there we go. Looking at overall building universal. So this is now all of the square footage, the shared use spaces, the gymnasiums, everything in the building, and thinking about it as a number of square footage per student that's in the building. And so that shows a different form of utilization. And again, we have a range from as low as 26% to 65% utilized. Again, this is, you can see MSBA and their normal charts and programming is about 180 square foot per student. And again, one thing of note that I think is worth noting, the sort of low number for the middle school at 54% is really sort of reflective of the very large shared use spaces. So you've got the auditorium and all the gymnasiums and a very large cafeteria. So the building's fabulous. It's a great resource, certainly. But as of, for instance, if you were to do a brand new building for middle school grades with MSBA, they don't actually fund and support an auditorium. So that just skews those numbers quite a bit for the middle school overall building utilization. And next. So we just like to try to make things graphic at a glance to be able to look at something. And so these little pies sort of hit on good, fair, poor, and just gives you a sense of where the buildings are and really in relationship to each other. We're not judging it against some brand new building somewhere else, right? These are just sort of looking at their utilization and efficiencies and the facility conditions and then comparing them to each other as overall. So the next. So our next section is about demographics, and Justin will take over for that. Next slide.
So we worked with the demographer to sort of outline and look forward, sort of given the current trends, given other known factors, what would the enrollment look like across the region in 2035-36? The last 5 years, there's been a 12% decline across the elementary and middle schools, which I'm sure you're all aware of. And in general, when you look at this, there's sort of within a range across the elementary, a fairly flat enrollment, as you can see from 825 to 818. But there's quite a bit of variation by town. Eastham is one of the few that is projected to grow during this 10-year time period. Part of that is around the new housing that is under development. In order to sort of forecast this, we look backward, and historically across the region, for every 6 units of affordable housing that have been created, you've seen a net growth of one student enrolled in the system. And so that ratio has sort of been carried forward. Obviously, there's a lot of ifs. We don't have a crystal ball to know if that exact ratio will continue, but that was sort of the best that we could sort of do from a stable perspective, is to say, historically, what does that mean? It doesn't mean that there aren't more children that live within those, but they may not be a net gain. They may already be in the system as well. So the history, again, is a ratio of every 6 units, a net gain of one student that's been included. The other factor, which you'll see, we'll talk about again later, that I want to sort of bring to your attention, is the capture rate. What that means is the number of school-age children that are actually attending the local public schools. You've all seen a decline in that, which reflects sort of a growing competitive landscape across the area. So whether that's choice districts that surround you and families choosing to go to other schools or private schools, homeschooling, all of those factors. So the most recent statistic was 69% of kindergartners that live in the region are attending kindergarten at the public schools. That means 31% of children in that same age group are choosing other options. When you look further down the road and look at the middle school and high school, you're generally in the mid to high 80s. And so part of that is around the grade level. Part of that is sort of a decline in the proportion of students that are choosing, or families that are choosing public schools for their children. Next.
Okay, apologize in advance, Rich. There's some animations in this section. So as Lori mentioned, we, if you were with us in the fall and kind of following the study, while the facility analysis was going on and the demographer was doing their work, we were also developing the priority framework. And the goal of that development was to really take a step back and find commonalities across the region on what makes a thriving school. And there were a lot of areas of overlap from the community, many core shared values, which is wonderful, and we expected that, of course, and also some natural tensions that just kind of came up as the community engagement was happening. So we conducted school leader interviews in the fall. We did the Thriving School exercise with the steering committee. If anyone came to the in-person community engagement sessions or the virtual session, the Thriving School activity was exactly the same. And we had a community survey. So we kind of brought all of that together to create the priority framework. And I just want to highlight, small school identity and keeping town identity came up over and over again. And of course, the tension there is also what came up was wanting better access to programming, more programming. And so those kind of themes we'll talk about kind of throughout as we go through some of our considerations later. Can you go to the next slide, please? And so these are the 5 core areas of the priority framework. And if anyone is kind of interested in understanding more deeply the work over the fall and the winter, or what exactly is in the priority framework, I meant to mention this earlier, but in the kind of footnote of the slide, there's just a reference to the final report section or the appendix, if you're interested in following along in those things. So these priorities reflect what we heard from school leaders, community members, staff, parents, and the steering committee. This framework is not a right or wrong answer. It's really, we hope it provides common language and a shared lens for this discussion and discussions for the town moving forward. And so as the steering committee evaluated different school models and different scenarios, we asked the question, how well does this particular scenario or school model support the priority framework? If you can do the next slide, please. I swear there's content on this slide if you can click again. Thank you. There's a few clicks in this one. I don't mind if you go ahead, it's fine. So the steering committee, before we could kind of get to what is in the final report, which is a deep study of 4 different scenarios, we took a step back with the steering committee and with the community in focus groups to explore school models. So whether that, thinking agnostically about not thinking about particular buildings, but thinking about would perhaps a K-8 serve the region in a way, and how would that meet the priority framework? And so the steering committee explored various school models. We had focus groups with teachers, school leaders, district staff, parents, and the steering committee to kind of discuss the pros and cons of those models. Thank you so much. and discuss the strengths and challenges of each model. And so we were able to narrow it down a little bit to remove a school model from consideration through those discussions. And then what we did with the steering committee was we took those school models and we put some more reality against them. So we included estimated enrollment, we included a potential location, we included facility condition and projected class size, and expanded those 6 models into 13 potential scenarios, and had kind of several discussions with the steering committee to decide, of these 13 potential scenarios, what would be the 4 that would go further and be studied deeply and actually end up in the final report. You can go to the next slide, please. So the actual scenarios are here on the screen. I know there are 5 rows on this graphic. Technically, there are 5 scenarios, but scenario 1 is really, scenario 1A there, the status quo, is really just the baseline. So we have a baseline to compare the other scenarios to, just to kind of give everyone a reference point for the existing conditions, 10 years out, what does this mean for the community? And so then scenario 1B only looks at consolidating the 2 Brewster schools into 1 PK through grade 5 school. And then scenario 2B is where we get more into some of the larger changes, potentially, just for exploration. Again, I haven't said this yet, and I meant to say it earlier. These are not recommendations. These are not precise locations. These are meant to be scenarios and tools for each town to come back to. This is meant to be informative and really like tools in your toolbox for each town to move forward with informed discussion. So scenario 1B consolidates the 2 Brewster schools into 1 PK through grade 5. Scenario 2B looks at consolidating into 2 regional PK through grade 5 schools. 2C looks at having 3 PK through 5 schools. And scenario 5B is a little different, where it looks at having 2 regional PK through grade 2 schools, and then the region consolidates into 1 grade 3 through 5 school before, kind of moving that consolidation experience up into grade 3. You can go on to the next slide. And so here is the part of the presentation where I keep referencing all the information that we're going to have in the final 4 scenarios and that we're going to go over. But before we get there, we have a lot of assumptions to share with you all, and a lot of information to think about before we actually look at the numbers in the final 4 scenarios. So we definitely wanted to approach some of these aspects with research, and we heard a lot through the community engagement that school size was a concern on both ends, class size was a concern on both ends, and transportation was a concern with any discussion of consolidation and regionalization. And so we wanted to kind of, and you'll see in the report, research does point to small schools costing 20-30% more per student than larger schools. And as you can imagine, resources spent maintaining those facilities are resources not going to extra programming, more programming, intervention, enrichment, and things like that. And kind of limiting, smaller schools kind of limiting teacher collaboration and professional learning. And that came up a lot, feedback from teachers and educators in the community, kind of wishing and wanting for more of that collaboration opportunities, or feeling kind of isolated if they were the only teacher in their respective grade or specialty in their school. Class size, additionally, there are a broad range of class sizes in the region right now, as small as 6 up to 21 students. So you can imagine that students coming into the middle school with very different experiences in terms of class size. And the research kind of points to, of course, you can imagine, we all assume big class sizes means bad outcomes for students, but also there's a lot of research out there that shows super small class sizes can also negatively impact students. And so given all of the research, we went forward with a planning benchmark of 20 students. It's below the state recommended amount, and it's kind of in line with what's currently happening in the region for class size. And then finally, transportation. Transportation impacts when kids are on buses more than 30, 45 minutes. That's when really the impacts can be seen in terms of what the research is pointing to. And so when we think about consolidation or some of the regionalization options that we can discuss later, consolidation can really support more efficient routing. And we'll talk about this later as well, the potential for transportation reimbursement for regionalization. Okay. And what you see here are the core assumptions. So besides the assumptions I just went over that are related to research, there's also a set of assumptions that go into the operational models and the financial models that are in the report. And then Lori is going to talk about the assumptions that went into the facilities aspects. So just real quick, programming and staffing, we did assume a consistent set of FTEs across admin, operations, student support, and instruction. We did assume a consistent set of specials and dedicated staff for all the reconfiguration scenarios. And then for the SAIL program, we did assume that that remains in Brewster just for the sake of being able to compare the scenarios against one another. For enrollment, we did use the 10-year enrollment projections that Justin went over from the demographer, as I said, a class size of 20, and keeping students from each town together. So if you're thinking about regionalization, there is a world in which maybe Brewster students would come to Eastham, or students would be kind of split up to make the schools equal size, but that was not desirable. And so all of the scenarios keep the students from each town together. So there's no kind of like rezoning or attendance zones or anything like that. And then finally, pre-K is spread across the schools in all the scenarios except the scenarios labeled with a number 1. And finally, on the financial side, the compound annual growth rate uses, again, a 10-year horizon, just like the enrollment projections. It's calculated differently for different categories, and we calculated it using the previous 4 years of district budget data. So if you are interested in all of those details, those exist in the appendix. And this chart is just showing what compound annual growth can do. So if you look 10 years out, maintaining the current school models, you can see the $41.6 million there is where the annual baseline budget would be for the region. And then the yellow line is the enrollment trend, where enrollment is expected to go PK to 8 in the next 10 years.
Okay.
Lori?
Thank you. Okay, so again, we're going to hold you off on getting to the scenarios and talk about some more assumptions around the facility investment piece of this. So first of which, as we did look at all of the existing school property, we identified that Stony Brook in Brewster and the Orleans Elementary School have enough contiguous land to build a new building without displacing the occupied students in the school building that's there. In the case for the rest of the buildings, Eddy, here in Eastham, or the Wellfleet, there's space for additions to the building, but not a way to build something all new on the land and keep the school up and operating. That lends itself to some challenges in how that might be phased, because it's occupied, but we can talk a little bit more about that in the next scenario. We did ask and understand that it's very possible that the other towns have land that could be used for a new school building. Again, without that being identified, it's a little bit too far down the road for this study, but we did incorporate an all-new cost just so you had that as a baseline without identifying the land. The next line item about space summaries. So space summaries is a terminology and a document that the MSBA, Massachusetts School Building Authority, that I will keep referencing, has developed long ago. It's literally a list of all the spaces, the number of spaces, the sizes of those spaces. And we developed a space summary for every single scenario. It is in the report. They are not in stone. They are our understanding of what the sizes of buildings would be. Again, it's sort of looking at it with the same lens. all of the square footage could be a little higher, a little smaller. I mean, there could be other changes, but again, universally through the scenarios and through the towns, trying to come up with something that is comparative. In terms of what you're going to see for site diagrams, they are not designs. We have not designed anything yet, but they are plausible test fits, again, based on the space summary development of how large of a building would be proposed and that it would fit where we're showing it in the diagrams that we have. Worth pointing out, in all of the scenarios, the middle school stays a 6 through 8. Again, we did put out there the possibility of incorporating it into the scenarios, but it was decided to stay a 6 through 8 and therefore also stay at its existing location. So not through every single scenario, you're not going to see the number added, but at the grand tally slide at the end, we do incorporate the cost for baseline repair for the middle school in the overall budget numbers that you're seeing. So a little bit more about the MSBA and more assumptions that were put into this. The MSBA, I should probably know the year, but has been around, let's just call it 15 years. And I looked back through all of the work that they have done, and they have only funded just 3 school projects that were less than 300 students each. So we use that again as our baseline for assumptions around both scheduling as well as costs and potential reimbursement. We can be wrong. You might have something that's 250 and they say, yes, we will accept you into the pipeline. But we're just trying, again, to come up with a land of baseline assumptions here. This is a brief little primer on the MSBA. The chart you're seeing here is their document. We have incorporated it into our reports. You have it. It gives you a sense of the flow of the work that they do. So to repeat, they are the state's only funding mechanism for public schools. They accept applications once a year from any given town for any given project or building. It does not mean you're accepted when you submit. There are towns that have submitted multiple years in a row before they get accepted. It all just depends on what else is in the pipeline and what else is put forth, so it's very competitive. So next. So this slide here, we put together 2 different schedules. One with MSBA funding, one without MSBA funding. You can see along the top that with MSBA funding, it does take longer. They have a process, not the least of which is not reflected here. There's an assumption that you get in on your first try as a given project. So there's, again, built-in assumptions to be able to project escalation out. And what we're showing in our costs when we do escalate is an escalation to the start of construction. That's very, very important to point out because in a scenario that's a renovation addition, we have not solved how many phases that would take and how much time that would take. So we're not able to escalate out to, I mean, in a lot of cases in the industry, we escalate out to the midpoint of construction. We're not able to do that. So again, all are using the same sort of assumptions, escalated to midpoint of construction. The first bullet says we are using today's dollars and then going from there with soft cost and escalation. And at $550 a square foot for a full renovation, different than the baseline repair that we talked about. But the assumption is if you're doing work on your building, you're adding to it, you're going to fully upgrade the building so that it's all in great shape for the next 40, 50 years. And a construction cost of $850 per square foot for new construction. And again, as I noted, using those dollars and escalating to the start of a construction timeline with all the other assumptions added in. So, starting with scenario 1A, which is current model of where the buildings are, it assumes 2 buildings are replaced with new, Stony Brook and Orleans. That assumption came from both communities have been discussing that for some time. Doesn't mean they have to do it, but that's been in their pipelines and concerns for the ages of their buildings and the conditions of their buildings. Otherwise, in 1A, the remaining buildings would have costs related to baseline repair. The diagram on the left, the little footnotes here are, little thumbnails, I should say, are showing in Stony Brook and Orleans, little orange building that would be constructed on open land, which does mean ball fields, and I have to point out that then a phase 2 would be to build a new ball field to replace what has been built over. And the remaining of the footprints are shown just with a hatch and again with baseline repair. This is the last time you'll see the diagram with the Nauset Regional. Again, just for space, we're not repeating it going forward. So the right-hand columns in blue, I will talk to in a moment. Justin will talk to the gold columns. You'll see the range again for baseline repair, 16 million to 30 million, and new construction, 65 million to 75 million.
With regards to the operational factors, these enrollments align to the demographic study we talked about. And overall, you'll see here that the average class size ranges from 13 to 18 across the schools, with the projected operating budget ranging from a little over 5 million to a little over 10 million. One thing to sort of highlight here that you'll see again repeated is where there's an asterisk. We use the benchmark of the 20 students per class to do this modeling. It doesn't equal out evenly in terms of the cohort size of students. And so in that instance, for example, Orleans has 9 sections, which means there's at least one grade level that has an uneven number of sections. From a design perspective, realistically, no one would design a school saying we're going to count on only having 1 section on the 3rd grade while every other grade level has 2 sections. So in those instances, we've included an alternate in the report that would say, if you were to design it for an even number of sections per grade level, what would the additional operating cost and facilities costs be? Next.
Okay, so the variant with 1B is purely the concept that the 2 schools that are in Brewster combine as one building. And the scenarios proposed, we did one of an all-new and the other of a renovation addition. It has been asked, maybe down the road they want to renovate Stony Brook. There's lots of other scenarios that would go down into a whole feasibility study pass. So in this scenario, we have the all-new replacement of Stony Brook as a PK5 to occur on the same site as Stony Brook, or conversely, create multiple additions to the Brewster Eddy. One of the positives on this is that the core spaces of the Eddy School building are right-sized for more students to be served. And then otherwise, it's very similar to where we were with the baseline repair for here in Eastham, in Wellfleet, and yeah. So.
And on the operating side, what you'll see here is that the average class size for the students in Brewster goes up slightly to 18, so still under the 20 student benchmark that we outlined earlier. And combined, the budget would be 16.2 million, which is, more than $3 million less than the 19.5 when you looked at the past one. Those savings are coming from 2 areas, and that's what you'll see. This is the first example of where you can sort of see operational savings from a financial perspective. Those are driven from 2 factors. One, better utilization of the building, meaning you're going to pay the same amount to heat and cool a building, whether it's 5 students or 10 students, as well as from staffing. There are staffing efficiencies. Other costs, such as transportations, materials, supplies, those are all modeled on a per student basis. So in general, across all of these scenarios, that stays relatively flat. And so again, the efficiencies, what you'll see here in this instance is over $3 million worth of savings just by combining those 2. Okay. Next.
Okay, so 2B consolidates to 2 regional pre-K 5 school buildings. And so similar to where we were just at with Brewster, potentially an all-new or a renovation addition. The slight difference in the size of the building is, in this case, the PK will not remain all in Brewster. It would be divided, and this would be served in their communities in the 2 buildings. So the numbers are slightly less. I think I neglected to say last time, but you are seeing that difference in price with the reno addition versus new. I would anticipate when a full design came in that the ad reno number would creep up, because now it will be solved how you would phase and do that project, and that escalation and the soft cost that would be needed to do that would start to raise the cost closer to each other. In this scenario, Orleans houses a 465 student PK5 that serves Orleans, Eastham, and Wellfleet.
Other things I would highlight on this is that this is the beginning, and from this scenario forward, our assumption is that all of the pre-K students are allocated out to on each school respectively, so not housed all in one location, whereas right now they're all housed in Brewster. And in this instance, you'll see sort of this is the most consolidated scenario we did, that you reach 18, an average class size of 18 across all of the schools. And the budgets are $15 million and $17 million respectively for the two pre-K fives.
Okay, so in scenario 2C, and we also didn't mention that the weird naming of the scenarios is really a holdover for when there was 13 of them. And we realized if someone was reading the entire report and we switched these to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, people wouldn't be able to follow them. So I meant to point that out. So in this case, we consolidate to 3 regional PK5 school buildings. The Brewster story is the same. Orleans sits on its own site, serving its own population. And then the Eastham and Wellfleet in this scenario, not a given, but in this scenario shows a combined effort in Wellfleet. And we again did diagrams and layouts of how Wellfleet could be added onto, or conversely, a new school could be located somewhere else on land to be identified.
And in this instance, both the Orleans Pre-K5 and the Eastham Wellfleet combined Pre-K5 are ones where there is an alternate, meaning right now these models sort of project an uneven number of sections per grade level, and so there are alternates included in the report. Otherwise, it remains about the same in terms of average class size when you take the 20 benchmark, and the financial numbers are there. Next.
Okay, so this is the last of the scenarios. It's 5B. As identified, it's 2 regional PK to second grade, so a different model, and 1 regional 3 through 5. And so the 2 regional PK2s, excuse me, one would be in Brewster, serving Brewster population. The second would be in Eastham, serving Orleans, Wellfleet, and Eastham population. Again, a similar, we've added an all-new scenario on, again, unknown location. Conversely, renovations and additions to the Eastham School building to serve the population of 233 students. And then the combined grades 3 through 5 would regionalize all students in those grades for 405 students. And that would be a new building because that size building and configuration does not exist anywhere, and it's in this diagram, in this scenario, located in Orleans on the available land there.
From the operational side of things, you'll see here the smaller class size for the pre-K2s. This is not abnormal for early childhood class sizes, and so you do sort of reach the max. This is the one scenario where we see the 20 class size for the regional 3-5. That being said, there is an alternate in this aspect in terms of it's an uneven number of sections. If you were to bump it up into an even number of sections, it would be 19 students on an average class size.
Okay, next. Okay, so this is the sort of tally, if we were to say, and again, these are all numbers related to each other for comparison purposes. You cannot go out tomorrow for a vote for this dollar amount and do this work until you do a feasibility study and really come down to exactly your needs. The 2 columns to the right are in navy blue are the facilities. So the cost range we have for the baseline is $255 million. All things being equal of what's been described. And then there is a range for the other ones because it's the difference between ad reno and new construction in the diagrams that we have. But all of the scenarios do show, as far as facilities, a savings in relationship to keeping the number of buildings we have now and the baseline, with, maybe not surprising, the most savings is the least number of buildings in the end analysis in 2B, a savings of $53 million off of $255 million. And
From an annual operating perspective, these scenarios represent anywhere from a $3.4 million to a $9.4 million savings, and I would stress those are annual savings in terms of the annual operating budget. So these would also compound over time as increases grew, as costs continue to rise.
Okay.
You can go on to the, so we're going to move on now into, I know that was a lot to take in, and we definitely have more. For anyone who's read the report, we wanted to make sure that we, or at least didn't ignore the opportunities that the study has presented that have come up through community engagement and through steering committee feedback, and also the consideration. So that's what we will walk through. So the first opportunity is thinking about curriculum implementation and alignment. And of course, the region has made significant progress by adopting and implementing a common curriculum, but that success requires ongoing support and collaboration. So things like instructional coaching opportunities, intervention services, creating common professional development opportunities, and just thinking about collaboration across schools is certainly an opportunity that came up many times in feedback and through discussions with the steering committee. Second is, thank you, an opportunity to invest in global learning and world language for all students. So again, this came up consistently with community members, showed up in the priority framework, really just wanting a stronger global learning experience, world language, consistent experience. And so thinking about what is the opportunity to create a more coordinated approach, not just for Spanish, but thinking about STEM, art, and music offerings across the schools and making it coherent into the middle school is something for the region to consider. And finally, after-school programming. The access to after-school programming varies significantly across the 4 towns. Wellfleet is the only program that runs runs it themselves. The others are through partners, and that really just creates limited access in many of the towns. There's capacity limitations with the partnership programs. Families aren't experiencing the kind of the same breadth of options, and you can think about families perhaps looking to choose Nauset Public Schools in kindergarten. If you're told the wait list for the after-school program for your kindergartner is 6 months, a year, or I don't know when, that might be a real deciding factor for a family, whether they're choosing Nauset when they're entering kindergarten. So just taken together, these are all opportunities that aren't tied to any specific scenario. They can be pursued simply through stronger collaboration and coordination across the region, as the region is also thinking about decisions for facilities and school configuration. Next.
The next consideration, again, regardless of sort of school configuration, that we wanted to share was about pre-K and thinking a little bit more universally around pre-K. The 4 towns, and you'll see this on the table on the right, are making a significant investment in childcare for families and parents across the region. One of the aspects that sort of when you look at, there's a lot of research and data that shows the overall impact of pre-K in terms of the readiness for kindergarten, long-term impacts around graduation rate, college acceptance, things like that. And they often say it's about a $17 return per dollar on the investment into pre-K. So there's sort of a general, it's a wise investment more globally. That being said, the other thing is around that sort of capture rate that I brought up earlier, around that 31% of kindergarten age students that aren't coming to the public schools within the Nauset region. A lot of research shows that if a child is going to a private pre-K program where that same school offers a K-5, chances are they're going to stay in that program. That transition point is not sort of the thing. In the inverse, there's a lot of research that also shows a student that attends a public school pre-K tends to stay with the system for the entire duration of their education. And so that is an aspect that is a sort of, it could be a strategy towards increasing that capture rate and increasing the overall enrollment. The other thing is there are a lot of, I would say it's very clear, and this came through in all of our engagement, how important and real partnerships there are with community-based organizations and private providers. There are state funding opportunities out there. One specifically is called CPBI from the state that actually fosters and helps support the creation of public pre-K spots in partnership with private providers and CBOs. And so there could be some resource out there that could be tapped into to support this initiative as well. The next one is around governance structure. We did our best to create an org chart that represents the current governance structure within the Nauset region. And so to walk you through this, you'll see here the sort of yellow boxes are the districts across the top, the yellow squares. So we have the Brewster School District, the Orleans School District, Eastham, so forth and so on. Obviously, there's deep partnerships with the select boards around budgets and all of that. That next level, when you look at the bright blue box, that is School Union Number 54. That's a legal entity that can hire a superintendent and run a central office. The one to the right is the Regional School District, also a legal entity that can hire a superintendent and run a central office. Currently, they share the superintendent and the central office. That is a shared agreement right now. And then the yellow sort of is the joint committee, which is not a formal entity. That being said, many of the policy documents and a lot of ways of operating about pulling these two groups together is what is called the joint committee. This is an animated slide as well, so next. Overall, we analyzed, looking at this right now, there's about 30 committee members across these structures. And so in terms of a superintendent and managing the relationship with those folks that are technically his boss, or their boss, I should say, there's about 30 of those relationships to manage. There are 150 meetings that superintendent and senior staff attend and prepare for and follow up out of. And when you map that to the number of hours, about 32% of a superintendent's time is spent just in meetings and preparing for meetings. That number does not include managing the relationships across the board. Next. So one of the things that we sort of outlined in here and did a little bit of modeling is the idea of what if you were to go to one or two regional committees? If you weren't ready for one fully regionalized committee, what if you looked at one that was elementary level versus one that was sort of the entire K-12 spectrum? Next. You would sort of have easier recruitment and capacity at the district level and a higher level of leadership stability. Research shows that the biggest indicator about leadership stability within a district is the relationship between a superintendent and the governance. The more complex, the more dysfunctional governance structure is, likely leads to more instability and sort of being able to retain talent within a district office. In education, the general benchmark is that it takes 5 years to actually accomplish any sort of main initiative and see impacts and improvement. And right now, superintendent tenure is around 3 to 3.5 years. And so when you start looking at those numbers already, the sort of dynamic is one that is a little bit problematic. You add on to that the complexity, and you could have some issues. The other big piece here, one more, I think there's one more here, is that it could be, if you thought about regionalizing the structure up to $680,000 in financial benefits, the state is never going to, I like to think about state. We work in a lot of states across the nation, and there are those that are more of a sort of intervention type model of a state and those that are more of an incentive type model. Massachusetts definitely incentives. And so one of their big incentives towards pushing towards regionalization is eligibility around transportation reimbursement. Only regional districts are eligible for transportation reimbursement up to 100%. On average, districts that are regionalized get between 70 and 90% reimbursement, just because there are other underlying sort of caveats and rules about distance and all of that. Right now, the middle school and high school do receive some level of reimbursement from the state for transportation, while the elementary schools are not eligible for any. So even just if you made no other changes around school configuration or anything, simply regionalizing the governance structure to some extent could help financially across the 4 towns.
Thank you, Justin. And so for our final consideration, we wanted to look at functional regionalization. And what we mean by that is looking at the gaps that exist currently in facilities management, human resources, financial operations, grant administration, specialized services, and just thinking about what school leaders are taking on, filling some of those gaps. So in facilities management, there is no dedicated regional leadership. And so that does mean, and we heard that school leaders are taking on those responsibilities oftentimes. And, just not having a capital plan or someone who's kind of watching it and steering that ship is a gap that could be addressed outside of any of the school reconfiguration scenarios. Also, specialized services and instructional support being separate. It makes it difficult to establish or impossible to establish shared positions across schools. And flexibility is really limited to deploy staff if a student comes into the district and has a specific need. It's hard to deploy the staff that's needed in a specific school when everything is separated. In human resources, we heard about the challenge of how elementary school employees are technically employed by each respective town rather than the region. And so you can imagine from an administrative standpoint what that does, but also from a seniority standpoint, that means seniority does not transfer across the region. And it really kind of limits the ability for the talent pool to move laterally, or if they want to choose to stay in the region, but for whatever reason they're looking to move positions. It's a real limiting factor for teachers. And in finance or financial operations, I'm sure I don't need to tell the school committee and select board what it's like to manage these processes and the budget processes in 4 different ways, plus the region. But also for things that folks might not think about every day, grant funding is, you are limited in your opportunities because the elementary schools are not applying for grant funding together. And pooling those remaining balances or sharing unspent funds, all of those things are limited because of the separate financial operations. And so in the report, we've highlighted some of the neighboring regional school districts and some of their regional positions, some of their functional regionalization that they've taken on, really just to demonstrate what's possible. Maybe you can learn from your peers about what's possible and think about for the region, here's some lower hanging fruit that could improve even the experience of staff outside of actual school reconfiguration. So with that, we are at the end of our presentation, and we do have a slide for next steps for one of our steering committee members to go over with the community.
I can do it. Okay.
Just press your mic.
Okay, great. So the steering committee is going to continue to meet to discuss these important topics. We actually already have a date set for July that we're going to meet, but in the framework of how we've planned this out is in the next 6 months, we're going to be or in the immediate weeks following these presentations, we're going to be collecting more feedback from the public. So there's email addresses available at the end of this presentation. Also, and any of the school committee emails are also found on the website. And so the steering committee is going to reconvene, discuss the feedback from the presentations, and then continue to schedule meetings to discuss this and include, key stakeholders in it as well, and continue to get feedback from everyone. And also continuing the process of as Lori outlined, the MSBA and how that is a very long process, but there's also some urgency to it, specifically for some of the towns that know that they need to build a new building. And then so in the next 6 to 12 months, establishing those deadlines for decision-making given the MSBA deadlines and determining which scenarios to have further studies on.
One more slide. Okay.
Nothing.
So that's the conclusion of the presentation. We'll leave the emails up, and I defer to the.
Yeah, I can
course,
turn it over to
yeah.
the select board for questions, then you guys can pass it to the school committee if they have any
Did you want to
comments or
go
questions.
first, or you want us to go first? We can go first. All right. Hope, do you have any questions? Ha ha ha. I have like 7 questions.
Dark. Oh, I am on. I actually just have kind of a technical question. It's probably in the 500 pages somewhere. But do you happen to know what number was used for the affordable housing in Eastham that the 6-to-1 ratio is based off of?
I don't, but I can follow up and get that. And I think it was done across the region. It wasn't town specific.
Oh, okay. I thought it was each one. Okay.
No.
All right. And it's probably in the larger report.
Yeah,
I guess.
there's the demographer report is in appendix, or in volume 2, appendix A,
3.
or volume 3,
Volume 3. All right.
appendix B, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Jerry, do you have any questions?
They've heard all mine before.
Bob?
I have a couple. And I don't want to get into too much of the detail, but the baseline repair costs, they seem like a real swag here. I mean, who came up with those numbers? Just curious.
Myself, my engineers, and a cost estimator. And the full cost estimates are in the report, line by line.
I have not read the full report.
That's okay. That's okay.
So what's your sense of those numbers? Do you think within 20% accurate? I mean, you've had experience with this kind of stuff before, I
Yeah.
presume.
So the layering on of all of this is how you would go about doing it. I mean, there's a lovely term in my profession, summer slammers, where you're trying to do something when school's not in operation and how that sort of plays out over time. I think, and I've been having these conversations with your superintendent, there is something that says, if you have to do a scope of work and it's greater than 30% of the value, the assessed value, not the sale value, but what you pay taxes on, which you don't pay taxes, but you know what I mean, on the assessed value, that triggers doing a whole lot of other things. So it can be a chicken and an egg. This kind of goes to my colleague's point of having a facilities person that really has their head on this, as opposed to asking your superintendent to understand the split and what happens. So in any instance, it is a little bit of a math challenge of, if you only want to do a little at a time, how do you do that without ultimately triggering the bigger project? Or conversely, how do you phase, go in, say you are making it all accessible, you are doing the code requirements that are needed, and you're going to do it on this timeline and this schedule. And so that's
So,
a feasibility study, let's
so
say.
how did you, what tack did you take in coming up with these numbers?
So the first column that had the base repair numbers was through the assessment and the cost estimate. We got feedback from our committee that said, yeah, but we know it's going to be, that doesn't include design and engineering service, right? It doesn't include anything else. So we did a rule of thumb and just doubled it. So
Okay.
that's the number that you're looking at on the right-hand column on that slide.
Okay, so
that
you
we
think,
had.
I'm just guessing, put words in your mouth, it's more contextual than it is accurate line item by line item.
Right, once you get past that estimate that we've done, it's either by cost per square foot and projecting out all the assumptions that we highlighted in terms of timing and when it would happen. Again, getting into the MSBA, when, all of those things.
Right, got a lot of
So,
assumptions.
so your term of contextual or as a comparative number is accurate. I mean,
Okay,
it's.
gotcha.
yeah.
Thank you. On slide 15, when we looked at these, well, they were really opportunities and priorities. Get there. I was just wondering if there was a sequence to this.
The priority
The
framework.
priority framework?
Yeah. Bec-
Is that possible?
Yes.
21.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Here we go.
But are you asking, are they in a particular order?
It's not, priorities in the priority framework development, I guess. So this was it, slide 15, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I was just curious, I mean, these are all great objectives, right? Was this more like a mission statement, that all of this stuff is important?
Yes, and it provided a way for the focus groups and the steering committee to look back and say, for example, like bring up the tensions that the school models and the scenarios create. So for example, the discussion around a K-8, a regional K-8, a lot of what's in family and community partnership and school culture and belonging, there are kind of descriptor bullets for each of these that are in the report and on the study website. The tension there is, okay, so part of school culture and belonging, and across the region, everyone agrees we want our students to be known and have a sense of identity. A PK to 8, we think that that would mean that would get lost. So we don't feel like it's kind of meeting the school culture and belonging priority. And so it really did help narrow from an expansive, we could do anything, into the set of 4 scenarios that you see in front of you. And we hope that this framework, this is like the common language that the region can come back to. And it will hopefully allow you all to have discussions about the scenarios across the towns using kind of the same backstop. And some of it is excellent staff and leadership. That might be agnostic of where a particular school is located or the size of the building. You can have a great leader doing things in any school building. But it's important that is, the community said, this is important to us, and here's how we're describing it.
Yeah, so this is the feedback. So, again, you consciously didn't go through the whole weeding out process, right? You had something like 16 scenarios, you got down to 4 new ones.
Right.
Was this the way that weeding out process occurred?
Yes.
Okay.
Like ranking.
Yeah.
Okay. Only one more question from me. Why would we have kept the Nauset Regional Middle School in the assumptions with a $50 million repair cost?
As opposed to not at all?
Was it all roads pointed to that? I mean, did the community say, we don't want to change that? Why would we have left that as one of the baseline assumptions?
Yeah.
Well, starting with the
Starting with the school model.
configurations.
Yeah, starting with the school model discussion, one of the models did look at what if we moved 5th graders into the middle school and made the regional middle school 5 to 8, and using the priority framework, everyone decided that is not a scenario we want to explore further. And so that's why you don't see the middle school in any of the actual schools.
Same with the PK8.
Same with the PK8, yep.
So they were in there as variables to grade configuration overall, but it just kept not being selected.
But we
Okay, so
didn't, we didn't want to
based on
ignore.
feedback.
Yes.
Yeah, and we didn't want the study to ignore what's actually needed to be done at the middle
Yes,
school in terms
yes,
of repair.
Yes, if you keep it in the system, it will need work, and it does need work.
Thank you.
That was actually really helpful because I hope people go and read the report. I still need to go and read the report. But that explanation is helpful because it feels like you've already done a lot of the heavy lifting of what are the different values of each town and how do people feel about schools. So I have a couple questions and oh God. Okay, so let me go with the one that's maybe most straightforward because we're in Eastham. In scenario 2B and 2C, one is in Orleans and the other one is in Wellfleet. And previously you had talked about transportation and the ride being more than 30 minutes or 45 minutes, and I'm just wondering why it wasn't Eastham. Because Wellfleet to Orleans is kind of far. I don't necessarily have a strong expectation that people from Orleans want to drive to Wellfleet or that Wellfleet people
Yeah.
want to drive their kiddos to Orleans.
If it was purely based on location logistics, I would have put them both in Eastham, because they are in the middle between the two towns.
And I would stress
But
too.
for balance, go ahead.
Oh, and I would just stress these aren't recommendations, right? And so in terms of the scenarios, and I think in terms of when we had the longer list, there was some compromise here and there out of the steering committee in terms of choosing which of the 4 scenarios we would do the deeper dive on. And so there's nothing wedded to that and say you can't translate some of the facilities costs could be pieced from one scenario to the other. But this was sort of the final set that the steering committee.
And to be able to
selected.
reflect something happening in each of the towns, and what does that mean? What could that look like? But it's not a given.
Okay. And then you mentioned PK, and it sounds like we have a lot of next steps, and I'm curious about our abilities to consider adding pre-K to our existing school, even like, does Eastham have the space, or would it need to be a public-private partnership? And do the other schools have that ability? Like, is that something we could consider before?
Yeah, I would say yes, and I also know that Glenn is doing work on this, so I'll defer to him. But I know in Eastham, for example, there was the integrated pre-K at one point was in Eastham, and there's still when we visited, there's the 2 classrooms that had been historically used for that, and so I think that there would be space in the short term to consider adding that. But Glenn?
Yeah, we have talked, or I've talked with the school committees, even this study aside, that pre-kindergarten, the early childhood program, it is consolidated in one location right now, as I think most are aware, in Brewster. We are legally obligated to offer an early childhood program under the Department of Education, whether it's in one location, and we're not terribly unique. I know lots of districts have a centralized program in one location. Other districts have it spread out across their schools. But that is something that I've learned pretty quickly. We have to take a holistic look at for lots of different reasons. There is, it seems like, some interest in possibly having the program return to the elementary schools, which I think many would cite the likely advantages to that in terms of serving as a magnet to attract. But it is a little bit more complicated in terms of staffing and ensuring that the appropriate number of staff are in place. The programs have to be integrated and ready and able to accommodate children with special needs as early as age 3. So it is far more complicated than just having a teacher respectfully standing in front of a group of kids for a number yet to be determined, and that can vary, which it does from year to year. So those are logistics that we have to carefully look at. We're planning to do so. Again, even if this study was not ongoing, this is an important body of work that we have to do, and are going to commence that work in the summer to try to figure out the course forward. This has nothing to do with exploring universal pre-K. That's a far larger discussion, but it does center around what would the options be like, what's the interest, and what's the readiness economically and staffing-wise to be able to make a change to our current program.
Okay.
Suddenly a question that popped up. Justin, you talked about pre-K public-private partnership. One of the things that we've done in Eastham, and this is off the top, we have a family support package where we will give funding to a private organization, which allows someone who lives in Eastham but works in Harwich to be able to bring their child to Harwich, and then we will help contribute. And you talked about the state having some funds, but would they do anything with that scenario? Does that help, or are we way out of, are we far beyond any state help with that?
I am not an expert in the CPPI grant, but it's a competitive grant, and it's with a school district. So the school district would apply for those funds. And so I would imagine that specific scenario would not be eligible for CPPI.
Thank you.
And maybe not a question, but a reflection of, it's unfortunate that we have declining enrollment. I don't wish us to close a school. I have some excitement around the benefits of regionalizing a school for all of the reasons that you gave, but in terms of like what that means for our community to have so few children to practically support building new facilities for them, and then also understanding that the state doesn't quite fund buildings for under 300 students, and I wonder how much that might change over the next decade with declining birth rates generally, because I mean, these costs are huge and we have to pay for them through residential property taxes. We don't have a large commercial base to absorb that cost. And every single year, I'm just like, how do we pay for infrastructure? And so I just think about that and how housing also plays into it. I know how important the world language program was, and we live in a community that really values arts and music, and I appreciate that our communities continue to show up and pay for those things. And also, someone needs to be able to live here to do the job. Like, could we hire someone to expand pre-K? Like, that sounds great, but they need to be able to afford
Yes.
to live here. And so those were just my kind of swirling thoughts as we discuss these things.
And,
May I-
and oh,
I was just going to comment on the MSBA. Even as most recent board meeting that I attended, they basically, in that application that you would, they have 7 categories, and they are things like current overcrowded, expected future overcrowded, and then it goes on to facility conditions and other things. They have acknowledged that the scale is tipping, and those aren't what they're seeing as the check, the why.
Okay.
So they are seeing it just like you said.
and I would say, I mean, I think that NASA and Eastham and all of this, you're not alone in this factor, right? Nationally, the birth rates are going down. These are questions that are having to be answered by school districts across the nation, across the state. I think the fact that you're all doing this work now is really indicative that you're getting ready for what could be. And so I think that, I don't envision the birth rate, but as you can see, I mean, you all are doing a lot of work on affordable housing. And so for that work on affordable housing, basically to sort of be a net neutral on the enrollment, indicates sort of a big question in terms of how to think about the future and the long-term planning of this. And what's the vision, and how do you balance, again, that's the tension here. How do you balance the identity of the towns, the identity of the region, and ensure that you're giving the opportunities and the program offerings that you want your kids to have, whether that's arts programming. And I would flag, we really reflected within the operational model. I don't think we have had another district that has this rich of a sort of projected model in terms of the number of specialists and things like that, and that we included in the assumptions in the small class size. And I think that came through loud and clear across all of our engagement, how important that is. And so we built that in sort of within the assumptions.
Just one more question. Thanks, guys. Very interesting stuff. You were very clear on none of these were recommendations. So it seems like a kind of a get the ball rolling process here. So for next 6 months, we're looking at more information gathering feedback, trying to find ways of getting financial assistance, because that's data that can help us with decision making. So there's more findings of fact to be accomplished. And then, assuming that gets done, and you said it's in a 6-month time frame, establish a process for moving forward. What do you envision that looking like? Is that a steering committee with representatives from each of the towns? What's been your experience in how this actually gets moving?
I mean, I would say it in 2 ways. One, those are the next steps of the steering committee that sort of they collectively came up with. I think that, an advisory and steering committee, we have other projects that we've seen can play a powerful role in that, and sort of being able to sort of hold and be the disseminator, so that not everything is sitting with one governance person or one superintendent and being the messenger, but understanding. And it's where that priority framework that you asked about earlier, I was going to chime in earlier, like that is a nice grounding, because these are hard conversations. And at the end of the day, one of the things I'd say that we found to be very interesting is, while the priority framework, we've done this type of work in a lot of different places, you all are very different than what we've seen in other places. There are things that really came to the surface that we wouldn't say we've seen in other localities, like viewing schools as a community hub, like viewing the value in partnerships with community organizations and industries. That is not normal. That being said, it's powerful, but it's also common across all 4 towns. You all have a set of shared values that was really apparent, including those unique things. So, and Sarah and Jerry or Jackie, I don't know if you want to say anything more about the process.
Yeah, just to reiterate, the steering committee wrote those next steps because their work has concluded actually tonight with this presentation. So they had a certain scope of work. So they're all done with their work. And
So how would you envision getting off the dime on this?
we're going to figure that out in July.
Okay, because we don't have examples to fall back on. but obviously we've got 4 towns to be represented.
And everyone on the steering committee committed to keep meeting together for the next 12 months. And they're all,
That's great. Do you
You know, the
guys
select-
envision coming up with a set of recommendations?
I'm not going to answer that one.
No one's gonna
I
wanna
can't
tell.
see us all agreeing on one of those.
get there.
There's going to be some path forward. I mean,
Right.
2 of the towns have, you know, Brewster and Orleans know that they have to build a new building. I mean, they have to do something. We're in a different position. So
Gotcha. Okay, I'm just trying to figure out how we actually, get a set of recommendations to then
right.
make something happen.
I'm still trying to figure that out.
And I
That's
think
a fair answer. Thank you.
For what it's worth, you do have an example. You are regionalized at the middle and high school. The region does work together. You know, it's the foundation is there. And with the steering committee committed to meeting and figuring out what to do, I think, you know, that's the first step. So you
I
all
think you're right. I'm just trying to make sure I know how we would get there, and not knowing is a valid answer to me at this point.
Yeah, well, Bob, clearly Orleans and Brewster have some pressure, more pressure than we have on them. I mean, we all have the pressure of costs going up and enrollment dropping, although we may get some increase in enrollment, but basically we all have it. So I think that as we meet in the next 12 months, there's going to be some push. Let's get a recommendation, get something out to the select boards and have them agree or not agree to move forward in this kind of an approach. I mean, I don't know exactly where the school committee is going to, the regional school committee comes in on that and so forth, but there's going to be a push clearly from those 2 towns to move. And, and Wellfleet is in a situation where they're dwindling numbers. They're going to have 3 or 4 children in a class. So that kind of pressure. I think we're going to get the pressure, and it's going to have to come with some type of recommendation or some options to go to the select boards and then have to come back to it.
So Jackie, and also I want to make sure before we jump straight to next steps, we will also get your questions answered and then do questions about next steps. Yeah.
I am so sorry, but I just wanted to add to the next step piece. I think what Sarah said is essential. All 4 towns are continuing to move forward with this, and it hasn't been easy. It's not like there hasn't been a lot of pushback, but we're in it, right? So we're in it, and I think one of the things we're in it for is efficiencies and collaboration. Like, we've learned all kinds of new things that we didn't know. Like, the teachers would like to collaborate more. And that maybe the elementary schools aren't all teaching the same curriculum. I didn't know that before this. So I think there are things that come way outside of just the financial and come into what the school committees want to do and recommend, because essentially this decision is about each of the school committees also has to agree and join. So it's a huge partnership, but it's very encouraging, because there are probably, as I think I said in a meeting this, we can focus on school buildings and who might win and who might lose, if that's or we can focus on the 500 things that we could do that would improve the current situation, that we have recommendations for, that may or may not save or cost money, but certainly would help the school committees work together better, the towns work together better, and the kids get a better education.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, what we're looking to focus on in the next year or few months, anyway. Now I'm gonna sit down.
School committee members, do you guys have any questions?
Most of my questions were answered, so thank you. But I did have one specific question about the MSBA, just clarification. There was a slide that showed like the 2 scenarios, the 2 timelines, working with them and working without them, and that, you said it's very competitive. So I was just hoping to understand what is the difference with working with them? Like, do they fund the entire school building projects if you work with them versus
That would
it's
be
all on the
great.
taxpayers? How does that work?
No, so basically there's a reimbursement rate formula for each town. And I don't know exactly what yours is, but we used, what was recent with the regional high school project. And it's, we used a 30% reimbursement rate from them. Or I should say, I hate getting it down the road on this, but there's a calculation. They have a lot of things that they don't pay for. So your effective is a terminology that they're not fond of, but it helps to inform people. Your effective reimbursement rate, again, that we sort of gleaned from the regional project, so again, it could be slightly up, slightly down in relationship to which town and everything else, is about 30%. So that's why you work with them. Not because it's faster. Granted, if you did not, there is a point of diminishing returns. We can all do the math. If escalation and costs keep going the way they're going, and you didn't get accepted, and you didn't get accepted, and you didn't get at some point, you're gonna run out of steam of why you'd be waiting because, let's hope that's not the scenario, so.
So are all the numbers that you listed for the building costs and repair and new buildings, taking into account that 30% reimbursement?
For the schools that were over 300.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so the other numbers did not factor in that.
Sure. So thank you so much for all the work the steering committee has done and the information you've brought to us. I have to say, as a teacher in another district, I'm heartbroken when you think about the possibility of a community losing especially in elementary school. So that really is my bias.
Sure.
And I was just wondering also, I know the numbers with the buildings and rising costs, that's one thing, but I feel like some of the other benefits you were addressing with regionalization, it seems like NAWCET is already doing it, like with curriculum alignment. It feels like, Superintendent Brand's been, kind of really making sure that we're thinking about curriculum alignment throughout the district, even though the elementary schools aren't technically, they're a cohesive district. So is there a way to really maybe kind of tease out what we've been able to accomplish without the actual regionalization of the elementary schools? And are we seeing any of those benefits already?
That's a mile-wide question in some respects, but I think, the chance to think about all of this, it seems to me that, we've got really two dual tracks going on here. And as I've said previously, even if we were one school district, fully regionalized, we share the same reality that many districts across the Commonwealth, across the country do, and that is, an aged stock of school facilities with declining enrollment, and where do you put the funds to improve the conditions of those facilities, and do you maintain all of those facilities? That's the one fundamental aspect of this whole thing. Even if theoretically we were fully regionalized, these would still be undoubtedly some very difficult questions to explore and determinations to make. Do you keep the elementary school, singular elementary school in each of the towns? The other side of this coin, though, is around the efficiency piece and around not just governance, far more than just the time that my office or our team spends on school committee related functions, but what's happening across the elementary schools in terms of our governing that fiscally, sharing resources or not. As I've come to learn here in almost a year, this is a very complicated system. It's very inefficient, arguably, through the elementary levels because we really don't share many costs, unlike the middle school and high school. So there's that aspect too. And do the two come together? That will, of course, have to be determined in time and with, as Jackie said, based upon the conversations of the steering committee where this goes. But there is time is of the essence here, certainly as it relates to the school facilities, because The MSBA project is a great avenue. If that's the only funding source, then all of the 4 towns, I don't mean collectively, but individually, will have to pursue or leverage to engage in a school building project. As many in this room know, it's a very competitive process. There are lots of communities that apply each year. Once a year, that window of application opens, and there are most that don't get in, so you have to try again. And then once you do get in, you are talking about between 5 to 7 years. So every year that goes by that takes us to determine what sort of the trajectory is, or the direction rather, we want to go is another year. So, very quickly, we're talking about, and I think it's a great move, the steering committee's commitment to meet for the better part of next year. Nothing's going to happen next year, certainly, for us. Does it take another year on top of that or 2 to decide? Very quickly, if MSBA is the avenue in, we're talking about any changes to school facilities that'll be quickly a decade out. And so the tension there is, in some of the buildings, Eastham is not in this camp, as I've come to learn. It's in arguably quite great shape. It still needs improvements, but we've got some other schools, particularly in Brewster, Wellfleet, Orleans, that need, they're not going to be able to stand as they currently do for 10 years without an injection of some capital. So there's some time is of the essence on that aspect, that side of the coin. So it's complicated. But I do think it's great that the steering committee collectively across the 4 towns have agreed to continue to meet. I think that's the absolute right thing.
I just have a comment to continue on the facilities discussion, is that it is nice to see that we don't have a huge, we have the lowest sticker number in this report, but it also makes me think that we need to use this to focus on maintaining the asset that we have. As they mentioned, there's nobody that is dedicated to maintaining that building, and now we have a new principal. And when we interviewed her, we didn't ask, how's her HVAC knowledge or anything. So it's definitely on my to-do list to talk with the town about how we can get somebody, looking at this report, there's line item details of the things that need to be looked at, how we can have somebody in town address that. And because even if all of the towns do agree to get this regional facilities person, that's not going to happen for at least a year. And so I think we really want to make sure we're maintaining this asset, and that it would be worth the time to find somebody in the town to be monitoring that. And then I just have one technical question that came up as you all are giving your report. In the demographers' calculations, does that include pre-K? Or
no, it includes the integrated pre-K only.
Okay.
So it does show a little bit of fluctuation, but that generally hovers around high 30s to 40.
And so was that put in Brewster then, or do you?
Yes.
So the integrated pre-K is only in the Brewster numbers.
Correct.
So
in the Stony Brook numbers and the demographers
right,
report.
and so the Eastham increase is true kindergarteners through 5th grade.
Yes.
Okay.
And largely based upon, if you look in the demographers report, he's done a good job and sort of worked with each of the town administrators to really understand. So the one thing I would say is the assumption, and I think this is a risk within that. I mean, there's the ratio that I mentioned, but it also assumes sort of best case scenario as to timing of when those housing developments will come online.
Right. But I mean, he also did it with all the other towns,
Correct.
He held that steady against all the other towns,
Yes.
and Eastham was increasing, so.
Yes.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Okay. So we've talked about, I consider it that the school gets totaled by the state. Like, you have something wrong with your car, and then at some point it's not worth the value of the car anymore, and you need a new one. And that's how I think about what the state requires of us in schools. If you reach a certain amount, you have to do a new one. And so in these code compliance situations, does the state, they need to be addressed sooner rather than later. I understand that a building needing a new HVAC system isn't something that necessarily can wait 10 years, but what does the state want? What does the state do if do you just need to tell them you're working on a plan?
So, I'm not sure all the couple different aspects that you're talking about. So, there's a building code, and that is the one that we were talking about. If you do 30% of the assessed value, you're tripped into upgrading everything.
That one.
So that's that piece. I think that the argument could be made that you had a plan in place that's a phased approach and how you're going to do it. So it reads as a project, but it's over a period of time that they would have to accept. Now, by they, I mean, it starts with your local code official type of thing and their comfort level with saying, yes, I accept, because again, the state doesn't really want to be in everybody's nose on every single project that happens in every single town, right? But if for whatever reason there's a concern, it could go up to, state officials to look at it. So it's not something I've done before to tell you every single step, but that's the general gist. Now, conversely, although you probably are familiar with this, everything we've been talking about are what MSBA calls the core program. They also have a repair program. It's less than it used to be, and it really is very finite of what it covers, and it's about electrification. I think it still covers windows and roof. So they used to cover boilers and things like that, but they are, I'll use the word pushing. I mean, I design sustainably, so I'm okay with this, but they're pushing electrification wherever possible. So they don't really want to buy a new gas boiler for a building anymore. So those are changing targets, but there are other resources. If you're not doing, like we were just talking about, in Eastham, a full-on core program, you might look a little further into their other programs.
I should say, from a non-technical perspective, when I was helping to sort of run a school, our school was grandfathered, I think it was the 1976 code. And so what happens is you sort of are grandfathered based upon the code that was in place when you were built, something like that. But then if you're making an investment, we had to then up it based upon that aspect. So that is sort of you all of a sudden have a new code that's applicable to you is what ends up happening in that regard.
Yeah, I guess my concern is for our neighboring communities who have, I don't know how, it seems like they're right at the edge of having to like formally engage in that process.
I mean,
or maybe they already have, and I'm wondering, I mean, maybe that's what the steering committee will also go over of like, because this seems like how do we intercept it to save the entire region money? And I don't know if the state would be punitive and be like, well, you didn't upgrade the school.
No.
Or something.
I mean, the state, as far as MSBA goes, no, they wouldn't be.
And I think
they wouldn't, they're not, well, they don't, I've never seen a history that sort of says, oh, you didn't keep your building up well enough, I'm not going to, that doesn't work that way. They know that buildings age, and they know that funding is funding, and communities do their best, and, all of that kind of stuff. So that wouldn't be the case. I think, again, that the concept in the next six or whatever months of reaching out to them to sort of understand how do four towns that are four distinct towns, how do they work with the MSBA as four separate entities, and anything else that I mean, I guess I'm going to say this on a public platform, my one concern is that they knock on the door of regionalization more. Because their hat is about giving money for building projects, which are very expensive. They want them to be efficient. They want them to make sense. And there's just, if they're buying a school kitchen, they want to buy it for 400 kids, not 150 kids. I mean, they're using our resources. It is our money, right, that they're using. And they want to do it as efficiently as possible. So I think you're going to find out when you have those conversations. I think the work that you've done now is a huge step towards the communities are talking and understand where everyone's coming from. And maybe by the time you have that conversation, you've hardcore said everyone's keeping their elementary school, period. And maybe that conversation's enough with MSBA. I don't know until you open that door and have those initial conversations. Yeah.
I love how the fourth presentation, you finally, broke it down and said the whole hard truth.
Well, now you have to, everyone has to listen to all of them.
It does really come down to, I think to the question earlier, how are decisions going to get made? How are you all going to work together? If at the gate you all say, you know what, there's no version of the future where any of the towns are going to give up their elementary school, like that might be just start that, whatever it is, but who is making the decision, what entity, the steering committee has no real authority, they're a steering committee, there's no authority there. And so it gets complicated and lots of steps very quickly. And to Glenn's point, you could spend years talking about it, and then before you know it, you've lost 5 years.
But I do think, as Glenn outlines it as well, there are two paths. So, I mean, I think that there's, and I think you're getting at this too, Jackie, there's a feel good of making steps in the right direction. They're going to be the smaller steps first.
Right.
And,
Yeah, I was gonna just say, like, whatever the quick wins are
Yeah.
to show that we're advancing towards this end goal, even though, because it's going to take a long time, it just does. But even some of the, kind of the governance changes, administrative changes, even if they save $100,000, I mean, it's not much compared to what we're talking about, but to me anyway, it shows like a good faith effort that we're going down this road and this path.
If you're gonna stand, you could stand at the other
It's
one.
not an all or nothing proposition either. I mean, we've talked about, three towns could do something together, 2 towns could do something together. This is a creative situation. It's not necessarily all 4 towns do or don't do. So that's what everyone's afraid, so afraid of losing the elementary school that sometimes it's hard for us to think about all the other things that we could do that might make people happy and not upset. So,
Do we have any questions from the public? Mary, come on up.
Is this on?
Is the green light on? On the mic?
Got it.
Does it not have a base? Does it have a base like these
I
ones?
turned it on.
that's a light.
Is that,
Yeah.
do you hear me? Yeah.
Goodness.
Mary Shaw, 850 Schoolhouse Road. I want to thank you for all the work that you've done on this program and your presentation tonight. I do have a question. I think we're all aware that we have just spent $170 million on the high school. And it's my understanding that that high school was built for about 900 students. And I'm looking at the projected enrollment down here for 2035 for the high school. It's even less than what it is now, and you've got 613 down here. That's about 300 students less than what the high school will hold. But you have not included anything to do with the high school and those 300 students in your program. Can you explain to me why not, and why shouldn't it be, and what your thoughts are on that question?
Mary, I'm going to answer that question.
Okay.
So I'm sorry, we have to go back. This whole thing started with Brewster, Eastham, Orleans saying, we have some funds that are only available to municipalities, and they're only available if you talk about sharing, efficiencies, regionalization. So we applied to the state of Massachusetts to get the funding to do this study. So that is how we started. So it did not include the high school because we didn't ask it to include the high school because the high school was already being built, Mary, and there wasn't anything we could do about that. So we focused on this. So, if you think about the future, 10 years down the pike, there may be some different options, but I think Glenn and the school committees can talk very clearly about how different middle school is from high school and how difficult that integration would be without making another huge alteration to the high school, which I don't think any of us want. So anyway, right now we're just focused on that. The good news though, Mary, is that the middle school is not as in bad a shape as we thought it was. So that's good.
And you mentioned that schools are, the happy capacity is at 85%, right? So you.
For the classrooms.
For the classrooms.
Classroom utilization. Mhm.
Right, okay. Does anyone else from the public or online, if you are online, raise your little Zoom hand, or we have another person in person.
Hi, Steve Kanajic, 20 Bluebell Lane. Based on the new information coming out this fall with the student enrollments, will this report be updated so that you're keeping it in line, looking at the future? Or is this considered done and complete?
I don't know that there was a thought to specifically update this report, but certainly, the enrollment data, which we do update annually, that's something that we will do as we did this year and we'll do next year. But I don't doubt that it will come into focus as the steering committee continues their work to just look to see where we're tracking for next year as it is. I mean, there are some variables that are happening. I mean, the looming question we'll know better in September. How many? What's our capture rate? The term used earlier, from NOSIT students for high school that are actually going to the high school. I mean, there's a question that looms there about will more kids stay because the project's done now? So, we have some moving targets, but tracking enrollment in general is something that I've learned in this role is critical. Even if we weren't having this discussion, what's the actual retention rate of students migrating from one grade to the next? So this will get refreshed, maybe not within the context of this study. This study essentially is closed, it's done. That report will be static, if you will, but the enrollment tracking and projections certainly won't be.
The only thing I'm bringing up is you're probably 3 or 4 years away from hiring an architect at this point.
Yes. Well,
A lot's going to change as far as your projections. A lot. The baseline for the report's been done. To upgrade it based upon new student information, I would assume would be an inexpensive operation.
So certainly with the MSBA process, the early phase, they call feasibility study, includes enrollment projections. Because in fact, there becomes a level of negotiation between what the state says yours are and what your findings, and there's a lot of discussion that happens to agree on, and you did all go through this for the Nauset High School as well, to agree on that. So it will not be based on, whatever year it happens, it won't be based on these numbers. It will be based on projections that are done specific for that study.
So the report would be updated.
Well, won't necessarily be this report, but there's a whole.
500 pages.
There's
No.
500 pages.
No.
Right, yeah.
I mean, you got your sheets all prepared.
Yeah, all ready to go.
No, I would just say, I mean, I think, and Glenn, I know knows this too, like, I think what we see with a lot of the districts we work with is two things. One, there's sort of a demographer that's just on retainer year after year, and they do updated studies every year. Or there are sometimes within a district office, they build certain capacity to be able to do not as official, not as fine-tuned, but a general level of updating projections. And so it's not an uncommon practice, and I think something that is a healthy practice in general.
Okay. Last question, I just want to expand on what Mary said too. If you look back to 2 years ago and you had the current information that you currently do as far as the high school, would you be looking at different scenarios?
So
With-
you'd have to go back 5 years.
5 years?
Yeah.
Well, I'm just saying, the numbers have changed so much as far as the high school. Is there more efficiency? Is there more money to be saved? Is there, savings to be made at this point based on that?
I can't answer that question, but I can answer you. I'm gonna answer it in a different way.
I understand you got to draw a line sometimes.
I think you need to give your new high school building a little bit of time. Because in my profession, we definitely use the line, if you build it, they will come. And we see it happen. Most of our schools open and they're full, more so than they expected. Because a lot of times you do lose, I'll say students, but I really mean parents, if the facility is in great shape or they're looking at multiple years of renovation and everything like that, they just cut bait and go someplace else. So I wouldn't be making any, direct assumptions about those 300 seats or whatever you all are calculating. I would give the building a little bit of time to get the people back
I
in.
agree, you lose the parents, not the students. Students are not aware.
I think one other thing, one other thing I would just respond to that sort of contextually is that we've seen shifting is, and you have this is a live dynamic at play, is this idea of choice. You know, parents today are really thinking about education as a marketplace and picking the right options. And they're, you know, you all are surrounded by choice districts. You have 2 towns within the Nauset region that have started to open limited choice seats at the elementary school. And so that in itself, in the last 5 years and the last 10 years, that is a different dynamic than what historically has been of education of you go to your town's school. And you've seen this even since the pandemic, it seems like, in terms of the number of competitors and the number of people that are comfortable with homeschooling, other options. And those dynamics are at play across the board, nationally, across the state, and sort of becoming more and more clearly at play here within the region. And I think that's where I would just say, in terms of 5 years ago, my sense is that wasn't as big of a dynamic as what you're seeing at this point either.
Could I just add? The question, not surprising, about the high school, just to go back to that for a moment. And as I sit here now and understand the landscape, I fully appreciate, and I think many do, right, that question about where the enrollment sits right now and why wasn't it part of the study, or could it be, or should it be? You know, one of the things that, even though not being here, I know played itself out is from those that were around the table and those consultants who were on the project team, there was a lot of thought that went into the design of that educational space based upon the educational plan that was put together for the high school program. A rich, robust set of offerings that obviously the 4 communities really have great pride in, and that building shows, and it will show. Whether or not a grade level, i.e. the 8th grade, can fit into that space would have to be analyzed. It would have to be studied and determined in terms of what would that impact be on that educational program for grades 9 through 12 that building was designed around. I respect the fact that some might just think, well, it doesn't, you can just sort of shoehorn them in, but that may have an impact adversely on what was planned and designed as part of that overall program. So it's not to say that it couldn't be studied or explored, but it would have to be, and thoroughly. So another study, another determination around what are there building modifications to that facility that might need to be, might need to be made, not necessarily adding space, but reconfiguring space. How do you inject, say, 8th grade students to keep them perhaps separate from the high school population if that's desired? So those are things that obviously weren't in the mind's eye when that building was built and everything was locked down however many years ago. It's understandable that they're cropping up now, but it is more complicated than just, the aggregate numbers, which I understand, but I just think we have to be cautious and careful around, impacting in an adverse way that amazing facility and the program and the staff that's there, because that we want to be careful and delicate with, for sure. So.
I have one comment. I just wanted to take this opportunity to explain to the select board to make sure that you know that it was something that Justin touched on, is school choice in the elementary school. So I believe it was last year or the year before was the first time one of the 4 Nauset towns, the elementary school, Wellfleet, chose to open up school choice. And then just this year, Orleans has opened up 6 seats in kindergarten for next year. And, if a student chooses to go there, then they get $5,000 from the whatever town they're in. So now, as one of the school committee members said, as we were voting on it, we did not vote to open up the school to school choice, is that we're surrounded by 2 towns with it. So
Is Wellfleet on its first year of it?
no,
They haven't. So this is for next year.
this past year was
This
their
past
first
school year was the first year.
Yeah.
And
So the current school year was their first year.
and did they fill it?
No.
No,
They got, they.
like 2 or 3 students.
A few students they
Yeah.
wouldn't have had otherwise.
Okay.
Correct.
Yes. Once they're in kindergarten, they can choose.
But Wellfleet's was seats in most of the grades, so it wasn't just kindergarten and Wellfleet.
Oh, for this past year, yes, you're right.
Yes.
Orleans is just kindergarten.
Orleans is just going to do kindergarten. once you accept a student via school choice, then they have to stay in the school. You have to allow them to stay in the school, and then you can close the school choice option.
Are there any other questions from the public or online if you want to raise a Zoom hand? Oh, yeah, sorry, Carrie. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Carrie Hoffman, and I'm obviously on the Regional School Committee from Brewster. And thank you for allowing me to speak. I have to tell you, I've had the pleasure of now attending 4 of your presentations. And what's been fascinating, not only listening to you guys has been great, but listening to the different comments from each of the towns and the passion and the just how folks really embrace their own towns and their identities and thinking about this conversation. I think it's been fascinating to watch. I encourage folks to watch these discussions in all of the 4 towns if you have a spare minute to do that. But the other part of it is the overview, before I get into a specific, is that I'm so excited we're finally having this discussion. I don't think this would have happened 5 years ago, 4 years ago even. So I'm glad that the door has been open to at least begin talking about all the opportunities, and not just scenarios, but like you had said, Jackie, all the opportunities and possibilities of working together to create more efficiencies, whether it includes regionalization, the big R regionalization, or small regionalizing of some programs. So I'm excited about that. And so that gets me to the other point of that it seems like not only 2 levels that you talked about, Glenn, but 2 levels in terms of looking at school building, like housing students across the 4 districts, the 4 towns. I don't want to call them districts because they're the towns that are part of the Nauset public schools. But looking at the governance, because even folks were talking about the efficiencies and how could those things happen. Somebody mentioned low-hanging fruit. I don't remember who that was, but it's true. And so some of these efficiencies can happen, where it's building more enrichment after-school programs for childcare, either before or after school. Those can be done without necessarily working from one town to another. But some things like more efficiencies with staff, where you can't really hire a part-time staff person in one town and a part-time staff person in another town because they won't be eligible for benefits. Another is that you talked about the whole thing about teachers moving from one school town to another town. They'll lose their seniority to do that. So I think even just looking at staff and HR and how that gets how we can be more efficient might include some kind of regionalizing of governance. So I'm kind of interested in looking at all of those efficiency opportunities and also looking at how that affects the governance of the district, separate from how school buildings. So how does that governance play out? And I think I've asked this to you guys before, that I know there's money out there for a part 2 for this grant, somewhere out there. I've heard that exists. So if you were writing the RFP for that, talking about governance, where would you even start? I know the committee is going to be looking at some of that, but how do you move that forward? Just even the governance piece forward to look at efficiency and governance separate from the school buildings.
I mean, I think the first step, I would say it's visioning, but a layer beneath that, I think there's a real norming and outlining of expectations of what you mean by governance as well.
Okay.
One of the things that I would say that sort of doing the study is that each town in their governance structure does function a little bit differently, and it would change the way that looks. So to take something like the budget, for example, right now when you're talking about a school committee that's only reviewing one budget, you're getting into a level of granularity and detail that just wouldn't be feasible if you were looking at 7. And so that would shift a budget presentation from looking at line items in a school to what's the district-wide budget, what's the central office, what's school 1, school 2, school 3, school 4, at a different level of detail. And so I think there would need to be some visioning and norming about how you would want that governance structure to function, because I think it could be, there's a lot of models out there, but I would say there's a level of granularity and into the details that the current governance structure is that's not normal. more broadly.
Not typical.
Right, not typical, typical, thank you. And so I think there'd need to be some level of understanding of what that change management that would need to be involved from a cultural and community perspective as well.
Yeah.
And
So-
I would add to that, I think we talked about this in last week sometime, the uncovering, we did a little bit, undoing the onion layers in what you saw here tonight, but there's more under there to understand whatever it says in policy is one thing, but how people actually function in practice is quite another. And interviews, like the work to uncover what is happening in each town to inform the vision, to inform the whole change management piece is really important, because practice and little p policy and big P policy, that Venn diagram is kind of where the starting point would be.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you for all your work on this.
And I do want to remind everyone that this was a starting point, and this was a hell of a starting point. This is such a massive amount of information that we wouldn't have had otherwise, but I do want to just hammer home that it is a starting point. This is going to be a snapshot in time. The steering committee for sure has their work cut out for them. Like, we all kind of had these conversations around next steps, and the steering committee is gonna look through all of those and come back and make a recommendation to the select board. And anytime we do anything large, there will be another study and there will be updated numbers. So I don't want to, I know I was like, why wasn't it in Eastham? But this is the beginning of the process. So there will be more.
Plenty more coming.
Yeah. Yes, Jerry.
I just want to say thank you to Lori, Justin, Paula, and Justin number 2, who's not here, for all that you did. I mean, in your contract, and actually putting up with the entire steering committee, mostly me. But I appreciate you. Jackie's shaking her head, yes. But and Glenn, you were all of them. So thank you for being in all those steering committees. But yeah, it is a starting point, and it's a lot of stuff, and all of us are under the same pressure of trying to get the best education we can for our children within the resources that we have. So thank you very much for all you did.
Thank you.
Ditto.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Any other questions? No? All right. Well, thank you. We appreciate it.
You need a motion to adjourn?
School committee, do you want to go?
Can I get a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Motion to adjourn the meeting.
Second.
We're adjourned.
I move we adjourn.
Jerry?
Second.
Okay. Jerry and then Bob, and then all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? We're adjourned.